English translation 695th contact Thursday, the 16th of November 2017, 21:55 hours.
Good to see you here already, dear friend. Greetings and welcome. I did not think you would come for a few days, but it is fine with me that you are already here today.
I felt the need to come here because I want to tell you that I found in my father's records what you had me. Ask about Anjana and Florina regarding the first introductory instructions and behavior that my father gave you. I must say that I was extremely surprised at all that was explained to you at your age, and that you obviously understood and therefore also decided on your mission. I did not know all this and have only now found out through my father's notes, which prompted me to delve deeper into them and learn more about you regarding your 11 years of learning. If you want, I can read his record to you right now.
Sure, naturally. If it suits you, please do.
What I found is the following, which my father Svath explained to you at the time.
Edward, you are still very young in years, but you will nevertheless understand what I have to say to you and demand of you, for your intellect is more than 3 times more developed than is the case with juveniles of your age on Earth. Therefore, you will also understand that it must be when I tell you not to speak, and also not to ask questions, neither now nor for the next 1.5 years. The time to ask questions and hold conversations will come only when I have made all the necessary clarifications and have also taught you many things and let you look, and I have made an analytical assessment if you want to muster the courage, strength, and interest for your intended task and accept it. The beginning of your learning will be now, but when you will have passed your first long learning, then you will have to decide finally on a difficult task which will last during the time of your life. Until then, however, it is important for both of us to remain silent, because this is the only way to achieve comprehensively flawless records. Conversations, questions, and answers would interfere with the necessary basic structures which I have to fathom and which are of urgent necessity. The teachings that I will convey to you starting with today will occur through this hood helmet, which I will put onto your head, hence we don't have to speak with each other orally. I will also take you to many places on Earth and let you see good and terrible things, which you will have to learn to understand and process mentally within yourself, and alone, without explanations from me, in order to strengthen yourself mentally in a powerful way. But all this is unavoidable because you have to learn and become powerful through it in order to be able to cope with your upcoming task and your life, which will demand a lot of difficulties from you. And in order to be able to cope with this, you must be prepared for it at a young age and learn a great deal in many respects. Just as you must also make a great effort of your own initiative and strength in order to be able to exist before yourself and before human beings. You will not yet understand the corresponding important factors if I tell you now, and will still tell you now, and which will be necessary for you to be able to pass and master everything when you later turn to your task. However, through the hood's helmet that I will put onto your head, as soon as I have said everything necessary, you will rapidly gain the necessary understanding and knowledge for everything and become very knowledgeable in many ways, even in your young age, whereas you yourself have to learn a lot on your own initiative, which will be inevitable because only then you can fulfill your tasks as duty, which will continue for your entire life. But it will only be when, after 1.5 years, I can evaluate the collected data about you and make a basic overall assessment of whether you can create the resilience in terms of your thoughts and feelings, your psyche, your mind, and your reason in the necessary power and strength to be able to take on, begin, and fulfill your task. And you will now only give an affirmative or negative head sign to my explanations whether you want to take this first task upon yourself, because you are already enabled at your young age by your intelligence to decide for yourself whether you want to learn and experience a lot under my care for the next 1.5 years or not. So let me see what you decide. But think about it carefully and take your time. You decide quickly, and your head movement is approving, so then everything shall begin with that. And if you pass the overall assessment after this first learning period, then your refusal or acceptance, whether you will be willing or unwilling to fulfill the task, you will no longer affirm this verbally but through your thoughts, and we will also be able to engage in normal oral conversations. But what the next 1.5 years will bring you in terms of learning and what forms it will take, that you will learn to understand through the hood, helmet on your head, as it will also prove whether you will reach the necessary resilience to be able to cope with everything you will learn. See, experience, and witness at your young age through your intellect, your reason, and your thoughts, feelings, and psyche. With this, I want to tell you the important things which will be the learning materials of your first learning. Time and which you will understand very quickly when I put the hood helmet on you and transfer all knowledge to you through it. 1. In the first sequence and in the first place, there must be a high overall education of your resilience with regard to your consciousness. Your thoughts and feelings and your inwardness, note, pataya, psyche, which determine your inwardness values, as well as your empathy, your capacity for sympathy, the clear and conscious reception of a respective content of an experience, a thing, perception, an experience, and your thinking. Further, your ability to impress feelings, your ability to impress the senses, your higher external ability to perceive, and your holistic ability to impress, as well as your emotionality, your ability to feel, your inwardness and cordiality, your inner life, compassion and sympathy, your inward ability to perceive, your strength of character, ability to feel, ability to remember, and your temperament, which must become just as strongly controllable as your ability to process feelings, also belong to this overall education. 2. In second place of the overall education is the ability to abstract, or the ability to emphasize and understand the general aspects of all conceivable things, and thus to bring order and clarity into the diversity of everything that exists and is given, which determines your realism. This also includes the ability to reason and to recognize the essential inconsistency or logic with regard to the forms and methods of correct thinking, which does not show what you think and have to think in everyday life, but only how you have to progress realistically and analytically from all that exists, what is given, what is present, what is real, and what is true, in order to arrive at irrevocably correct results. 3. In third place of the overall education is the resolution of what is presented. Note pata. Problems, the solution of which is connected with obstacles and difficulties. Demands understanding and reason, and which you must learn to master by accepting what arises in this way, considering everything, dealing with it correctly, and bringing it to resolution. That which is reproached or put forward must always be overcome if an unsatisfactory starting situation must be brought into a satisfactory target situation. Reproach or reproached occurs in various forms in all areas of life, as well as in many events and situations. 4. In fourth place of the overall education is your endurance, which is connected with the will to persevere, both of which indicate the resistance of your consciousness to fatigue, which means that after a great strain on your consciousness, thoughts, feelings, and psyche, you must be able to regenerate quickly. 5. In fifth place of the overall education is your willingness to learn and your ability to learn, and thus the willingness to promote your ability to independently perceive all educational contents in the long term and for the whole of your life, to absorb them in a concentrated way through your consciousness, to arrange and process them logically, to understand them, and to learn from your own committed mistakes. 6. In sixth place of the overall education is the learning of writing, which serves as a graphic sign system as a means of communication in which certain letters are used symbolically for special sounds or certain signs for special meanings. A particularly distinctive written and complex manner of execution is to be learnt, so that all aspects of the central idea, which is the most important object of every written content or text, are brought to bear, whereby all the manifold aspects of all themes to be executed are to be kept in extremely detailed explanations. 7. In seventh place of the overall education is a wide-ranging technical knowledge to be acquired, which is of very great importance for your task, and which will also include a special knowledge in certain fields and an enormous expertise concerning the whole structure of creation, the work of creation and the spirit energy, its power, the working of the spirit, and many other factors. 8. In eighth place of the overall education is your ability of expression, by which you will be able to express something through speech and writing, through signs, through extra-linguistic means, as well as through parables. Note particular example, comparison, illustration of a fact, not through a concept, but through a pictorial speech. This is a linguistic expression with approximately the same meaning, an alternative expression whereby this sameness, however, extends exclusively to what is denoted by it, but otherwise has different characteristics. 9. In ninth place of the overall education is the development of your arithmetic ability with regard to your above-average intelligence level. In addition to normal mathematics, this includes the development of the concept of quantity, the acquisition and consolidation of the meaning of arithmetical operation, the development and maintenance of counting and arithmetic, the acquisition and consolidation of the naming and graphic representation of numbers up to infinity, the simultaneous comprehension of quantities in the entire number range, and the acquisition of arithmetic strategies. For your task will also involve the fact that you will need the comprehensive arithmetic ability for the arithmetic description of the entire range of creation. 10. In 10th place of overall education is the value of the behavior of the human community. Note that social behavior, which is directed towards actions or reactions of human beings, as well as towards responding to fellow human beings, listening to their concerns and explaining things to them accurately and intelligently. The behavioral patterns of the human being community encompass all the diverse forms of harmonious coexistence, love, equality, and equivalence, whereby the process of learning the relevant behavioral patterns of the human being community is a long one for human beings and actually never ends throughout life. The behavior of the human community, which is contrary to peace and harmony, oppositional, hostile, and incompatible, rivalizing and outweighing all good, is unfortunately also part of the learning for your task, which you will also have to fulfill in this respect. 11. In 11th place of the overall education are your behavior, conduct, manners, and the manners of the human beings with whom you will have to deal during your whole life. This means that in this respect you must also acquire a good overall education with concrete behavioral knowledge and how you must approach people in the right way and show the human community certain good and clear ways of behaving, but also how you will actually handle the corresponding situations with which gestures, actions, deeds, and clear words, etc., you must approach the human beings in a positive or negative way. 12. In 12th place of the overall education is your independence with regard to your own personality, which includes your personal responsibility and self-reliance, your true adulthood, your maturity and self-sufficiency, as well as your own initiative and personal freedom, along with the necessary unattachment to faith, religion, sex, and politics. An unbending self-determination, self-reliance, and self-government with regard to personal self-sufficiency are also necessary, as well as independence with regard to foreign opinions, which are to be judged sovereignly so that, under certain circumstances, no influence may arise through other and, moreover, illogical opinions. Consequently, independence must be given in this respect so that no superiority or self-reliance arises in any situation through the control of other human beings against you. 13. In 13th place of the overall education is the learning behavior, which involves an extraordinary complexity of learning processes. This also includes the development of the motivation to learn and the willingness to learn, the learning effect and eagerness to learn, the need to learn and the need to know, in connection with perceiving, thinking, recognizing, knowing, and understanding with a clear mind, note petire, cognitive development and the creative application of information processing with regard to all knowledge. Connected with this is an increasing importance of language with regard to the specific Ausdrucksweise in explanations of knowledge factors for the instruction of human beings. 13. In 14th place of the overall education is your ability to learn to shape your life and to find your way in this world with regard to everything negative and positive, as well as the ability to plan and structure diverse things. 15. In 15th place of the overall education is the carrying out and arranging of all your work and the realization of all necessary and varied things and work activities, as well as there and many other things, logical checking and the responsibility to be borne for them. 16. In 16th place of the overall education is the learning of the functions and the working, forming and working of the inwardness, note pata, psyche, with regard to the being of oneself in a negative and positive way, in direct connection with the conscious and unconscious inwardness processes through the thoughts and feelings, as well as through the circumstances of the experience and behavior of the human being. Also, the necessary learning and understanding of the human inwardness and its effects and behavior. Note Pita, psychology, are of necessity and offer numerous possibilities, perspectives, and a comprehensive and very far-reaching knowledge in order to recognize and analyze very precisely the most diverse areas of the human inwardness, note Pata, psyche, and to apply them helpfully to human beings. This course of study will enable you to act in a psychologically competent manner and will offer offers numerous opportunities for helping human beings in connection with your work. 17. In 17th place of the overall education is your attitude to work, the completion of tasks and work and the associated organization, diligence, and absolute reliability, as well as the correct and verbatim reproduction of what is said and conveyed. Everything is connected with a just order to be kept, and in always sightily limited effort with regard to a quick completion, because the lifetime is limited. Consequently, also works of all kinds are limited and have to be completed in a reasonable time. These, Edward, are henceforth your learning factors, which you will learn in the next 1.5 years about the hood helmet which I am now putting on your head. You shall neither speak nor ask questions, but practice silence for the next 1.5 years, because this will correspond to an urgent necessity for your whole life, for many things will come to you about which you must never speak to human beings of this world, but only to me and those who will follow me. It will be a difficult time for you to learn silence, but it must be because it is of urgent necessity. Now sit down here so that I can put the cover over you.
Now that you are reading it all to me, I can kind of relate back to what all your father Svath told me. It was a bit much at once, but I understood everything clearly at that time and therefore also accepted that I had to devote my life to the mission and nod my head in agreement, which I have also never regretted, and from which also the worst terrible experiences, knockdowns, malignancies, and slander could not dissuade me, but which was only possible for me through your father's teachings and help. Thanks for your efforts in this matter. But something else. Every year more than 100 million more human beings are born, but this is denied by those responsible for the world and the statisticians, and in addition they claim that around the world the number of births, and precisely because of this also the mass of the population is decreasing. Consequently, therefore, fewer and fewer human beings are born and populate the earth.
Exactly the opposite is the case. Because with the number of adults around the world who uncontrollably produce offspring in large numbers, as well as with the high multiple million number of offspring becoming capable of procreation each year, who also produce offspring, the number of all births is continuously increasing. Worldwide, the number of births has risen to over 100 million per year for some time now, which means that the world population is continuing to rise inexorably. Claims to the contrary are criminal lies and have nothing to do with the fact that in Switzerland or Germany, for example, there are fewer births in a certain short period of time than was the case years before. It cannot be assumed that this is the case, because it is the total number of births worldwide that is decisive, Because it is this mass that is inexorably increasing and causing destruction and more problems in nature and its fauna and flora throughout the planet. As a result of which many genera and species of life forms are being wiped out every year. As a result of the irresponsible, criminal, destructive and annihilating machinations arising from overpopulation. Irreparable damage is being done to nature, its fauna and flora, and to the planet itself, which is also having an overall changing and destructive effect on the climate, which can no longer be stopped. Only a worldwide controlled, complete birth stop and a similar birth control up to a planetary tolerable level, as well as the fast and far-reaching end of all destructive machinations on the planet. Nature, fauna, and flora, as well as the climate, can bring an improvement in the long run, whereby this lengthy process up to an acceptable regeneration would take centuries.
You can shout that out into the world over and over again, but it is of no use and fruitless. But look here, I received this question recently.
What is actually the difference between Islamic and Islamist? Because both can be read over and over again in newspapers or heard on the radio and television. Why is this word used one time and then the other? Unachka, Germany.
I have written the following for the reader's question in one of the next issues of Bulletin, on which I would like to hear your opinion.
Unfortunately, the entire world journalism and the government all over the world have still not understood, or is it due to their stupidity and ignorance, that the IS is not an Islamic state, but the murderous terrorist Islamist state. That is to say, a murderer and terrorist organization functioning under the cover of the religion Islam and already spreading worldwide. Islam is cultivated by devout human beings who follow the religious books Quran to Quran, worship their prophet Muhammad, and are therefore nothing other than religious believers. Like the Christian believers, the Jews, Buddhists, and Confucianists, etc., whose so-called holy books do not list terror instructions any more than the Quran does. Islamism, which is based on the Quran, has absolutely nothing to do with Islamism and thus nothing to do with the IS or Islamist state. Islamism, also written with ST, is in absolute contrast to peaceful Islamism, which has nothing whatsoever to do with Islamist terror. The Islamist state is a Sunni murderer and terrorist militia that has been active since 2003 and has had tens of thousands of members in all the last few years, murdering tens of thousands of innocent human beings in bestiality and terrorizing parts of Iraq and Syria, but has since been greatly diminished because it has been decimated by the armies of Syria and Iraq, as well as Russia and the Peshmerga, while in reality the US military has not been acting much against the Islamists, but against the Syrian freedom fighters, or rather the Syrian opposition fighters. The Syrian opposition. The organizational beginnings of the Islamist state go back to the Iraqi resistance. In 2004, the group was known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq AQI. From 2007 as Islamic State Note, Islamist State in Iraq ISI, and from 2011 to June 2014 as Islamic State Note. Islamist State in Iraq and Syria ISIS, or under the false name Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant ISIL, and also under the transcribed Arabic acronym Daesh. After the terrorist conquest of a contiguous area in northwestern Iraq and eastern Syria, the terrorist militia proclaimed the founding of a caliphate on the 29th of June, 2014, under the patronage of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, as a former prisoner released from custody, proclaimed himself Caliph Ibrahim, commander of the faithful, with which the claim to succeed the Prophet Muhammad as political and religious leader of all Muslims was associated. This caliphate corresponded and still corresponds to a jihadist state-building project, although the terrorist organization has also become active in other states around the world, recruiting members for civil wars and terrorist attacks. This criminal terrorist organization is not only guilty of thousands of bestial murders and genocide, as well as other war crimes, but also of destroying the cultural heritage of humanity. These are effective facts, but the world journalism and rulers as well as the public media are still so stupid or ignorant that they still falsely call and refer to the Islamist state as the Islamic State and denigrate the righteous believers in Islam, thus inciting the dissenters all over the world against them. A fact which inevitably results in Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Confucianists, etc. around the world hate the believers in Islam, drive them out and murder them, as for example in Myanmar. But neither the irresponsible journalists, nor the rulers, media makers, and religious leaders care, because at least the majority of these people continue to use Islamic State instead of a correct name Islamist State, thus misleading the human beings worldwide and also stirring up hatred against the believers in Islam. It really makes one wonder how much stupidity it actually takes not to understand this fact, and that more than 1.8 billion believers in Islam are being viciously hated and denigrated. And this hatred and denigration is not only by many righteous believers of the 2.2 billion Christians, who strive so hard of love and peace and praise themselves in this regard, but also by the peaceful Buddhists, as evidenced in Myanmar, and Jews, etc., etc.
You also wrote an article about this entitled, "What is Islam?" Also, what you write here is in line with what needs to be said in response to the question.
Okay, then here's another question.
To Billy Meyer. Several times acquaintances of mine were with you in the Figu Center, but they could neither talk to you nor could they see you, which is why everyone could only ever talk to members of Figu and only receive information, etc., from them. While you yourself have disappeared and only let the members do the work, and that is always how it should be, as I was told. Why do you do that? And why do you not look after the visitors yourself, since you are supposed to be the important man who brings the great teaching and can also be in touch with the Pleiyarin alone? Surely it would be important for you to be at the front for that reason. Why do you let only the members do the work with the visitors? Why do you do that? If you are visited but by people who are interested in everything that goes on around you and what you do and teach, then the visitors are interested in you and not in the members around you. Everyone wants to see you and everyone wants to talk to you, because the members are not the main person, but only your subordinates, whom you probably only send forward because you shun the work and trouble with the visitors. I do not expect an answer from you because you are too cowardly to answer in a bulletin. Bartosz Domanski, Poland.
This is an outrageous indecency and impertinence and not worthy of a reply.
I also think so, but nevertheless I will give a reply to it, but only next year in one of the next bulletins, following which I will openly publish what I have written as a counter-remark. So I will give my opinion on it in the following way.
Answer. Firstly, I would like to say that your indecent accusations and their questions lead me to suggest to you that since you obviously have a good command of the German language, that you urgently take a course in decency and manners. This advice is extremely urgent, Mr. Domanski, if that is your correct name at all, which I doubt, because you only give the name, but no address. And apropos of my cowardice, you are cutting your own fingers, because I do not have to be afraid of answering your ill-considered and false attacks, accusations, and insults in a bulletin. Regarding your fax messages, with which you can neither insult nor annoy me, because I can only pity stupid, weak intelligence, retarded, pathologically foolish and infantile human beings, I can only say that you did not exactly eat your manners with a spoon when dealing with your fellow human beings. but try to eat them with unwashed pointed fingers, whereby, however, your manners probably always slipped away between your slippery fingers. Further, I have to say that the always only with members of the Figu is a form of description that I absolutely do not like and therefore have to object to it, because there is no such thing as only by Figu members with us. In principle, every Fidu member, no matter whether core group or passive member, is absolutely equal in the Figu Association and has the same rights. So also in terms of work performance, honor, dignity and integrity. So they are all equal like me and therefore not my servants, lackeys or subordinate, as you like to express yourself impertinently in your immorality and lack of honor. Consequently, all Figu members are therefore also not only members, which you, Mr. Demansky, would like to take note of and write behind your ears. As far as I am concerned, the reason why I am not on visitor's duty is not that I am a coward or that I am afraid of the work and effort involved. The matter is quite simply that, on the one hand, my work does not allow me, except in special cases that are unavoidable, to deal with the visitor's service and with all the correspondence, because I have various other things to do or work that lie solely on my shoulders. This takes up a lot of my time and does not allow me to look after the visitors as well. So, on the one hand, this is because my desire is not to be presented and marveled at like a zoological animal, which would also keep me away from my necessary and varied work for hours on end, as has become clear from previous experiences when I was still on visitor duty myself. So I keep myself in the background and do my work in silence, and so I can also achieve a performance that satisfies me in this respect. For my part, I am no more than any other human being, consequently I do not want to be in the foreground, but keep to myself and not be adored like a miracle animal or as a special human being. Even if I do a special job, this does not in any way mean that I would therefore also fall into the frame of specialness, which would also never be in my sense. There are many other human beings on our beautiful Mother Earth, which is unfortunately harassed and desecrated to the brink of complete destruction by Earth humans and their overpopulation and their very malicious and evil machinations, who do something special and who do not make a fuss about it, and who also do not want to be lifted up and adored because of it. This must be left for those who put themselves in the foreground and want to be adored excessively or at all because they are media-hungry, self-important, immodest and greedy for acclaiming recognition, praise and glorification in order to be able to confirm themselves in a false way. However, such action and behavior is an abomination to me, which is why I am happy if I can avoid it, whereby it is also part of this that I devote myself to my various works in the background and do everything necessary in this respect, and also hold back with regard to the visitor service, which our Figu Core Group Association members always provide to the satisfaction of all visitors.
This, dear friend, is what I intend to publish in one of the next possible bulletins in response to the nasty fax messages of this Mr. Demansky. What do you think?
Your words are well chosen, and there is nothing wrong with them. What you say all has merit and is kept pertinent and also lays out the facts as to why you let the core group members do the visitor service on their own, and why you hold back from doing so for understandable reasons that I do not think are objectionable.
Thanks. Then I would like to talk about something that I think you are also oriented about. Your father Sfath brought me to Iraq in the 1940s, namely to the area of today's Al-Basra and the wider surroundings, as well as to the inlet of the rivers on the Persian Gulf or Arabian Gulf. In the 1960s, I also traveled through the whole area on my own, and then crossed over to Persia, over the Zagros Mountains, to Tehran, then to Isfahan, which lies on the southern route of the Silk Road. I then went on to Zahedan and then to Pakistan, to Naukundi, Quetta, Multan, Lahore, then to Ferozepur in India, then to New Delhi and Marauli. Well, Sfath explained to me then that in pre-biblical times, more than 5,000 years ago, the whole huge area down there in the south of Iraq, where the city of Basra is also situated on the river Shat al-Arab, which flows into the Persian Gulf about 100 kilometers away, all the way down to Dilmun or to the east coast of today's Bahrain, was ruled by the people of the Blackheads, who called themselves Sagiga Note Bernadette, Sumerians because of their black hair ornaments. The whole large area was an unusually fertile and completely green area with a diverse animal and plant world, so to speak, a huge paradisiacal natural kingdom with fields, meadows, and forests. Dilmun, today's Bahrain, was also a large city in pre-biblical times and an important trading center, for its strategically favorable location on the sea trade route between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley was ideal and also promoted the prosperity of the entire country, from which many food products were obtained and shipped. The then flourishing and green region was also blessed with a large supply of fresh water from artesian springs, which, however, have dried up today. Regarding these artesian springs, I have copied the following explanation from Wikipedia, which describes what one is.
Wikipedia. An artesian spring is a natural discharge from an artesian-confined aquifer. Such a phenomenon occurs when groundwater is dammed in a depression between two non-groundwater aquifers. When the pressure level of the groundwater becomes greater than the distance to the Earth's surface, it can emerge as an artesian spring. Artesian springs occur, among other things, as fault sources. Lakes and other still waters fed by artesian springs are forms of pressurized water lakes. Artificially drilled artesian groundwater layers are called artesian wells. Geysers are not artesian wells because here the pressure is not created by standing water but by the change in volume when the groundwater is heated, hydrothermal pressure water.
Well, all my talk so far is actually because Sfath explained to me that this then vast, fertile, and paradisiacal area was that which is referred to in the Bible as the Garden of Eden, and where Adam and Eve are said to have been created. This Adam-Eve story, however, your father explained, did not lead back to the Garden of Eden, and thus not to the giant paradisiacal area far above the Persian Gulf down to Dilmun, or today's Bahrain, but rather to the Babylonians, who invented this fable, which was then adopted by other peoples of that time on the one hand and on the other hand stolen from the ancient Hebrews and later practiced as the story of the origin of human beings in the Torah, and even later by the Christians in the Bible. Sfath said at the time that the original Garden of Eden Adam-Eve fable had corresponded to a completely different version, but which I have largely forgotten, which is why I want to ask you whether you are familiar with this version, and whether you can give it to me again. My preface to my question is a bit long, but I also wanted to set out what is still in my memory.
Your explanations were interesting, and indeed the whole thing is known to me. Consequently, I can fulfill your wish, for which, however, I want to refresh your memory with some additional details. The city of Basra in the south of Iraq is indeed situated on the Shat al-Arab, which means coast of the Arabs, and is the capital of the province of the same name. Basra is the most important city in southern Iraq, which is populated by a majority of Shiites as a result of the oil industry. Basra is one of the first cities founded by the Arabs after the conquest of the Middle East. The river Shat al-Arab, it is probably important to explain, originates in Iraq about 60 kilometers northwest of the city of Basra, where it joins the great rivers Euphrates and Tigris. But as far as the fable is concerned, the basis for it originated in Dilmun, namely by creating a legend that described 12 clans that came with all their relatives from a foreign region beyond the Great Mountains. Note Billy, the Persian Zagros Mountains bordering Iraq are the only ones in that region above the Persian Gulf. High in the north and toward sunset, note Billy. This indication points to Turkey's being the only one in the region above the Persian Gulf. Billy, this refers to Turkey, after which two young human beings, a woman named Udnar and a man named Udnadistin, who were very fond of each other, planted their first large garden together, planted all kinds of fruit and vegetables, and soon produced 2 offspring, who were named Naraftan and Biratin. These went as young men to look for wives in other areas, and returned with their wives and other human beings to Dilmun, after which slowly over many decades the whole paradisiacal land was settled and became known everywhere as Paradise. Especially because from Dilmun a very active trade was carried on with various other countries.
Thanks. Now that you're bringing it all up, I'm able to remember it again. Then the following. Ascot explained to me the event of the first heart implantation in Cape Town by Christian Barnard, which she also recorded pictorially, which I guess we would call filming or videotaping or something. She also said that Barnard was not the actual actor, but almost only a supporting actor. Ascot further stated that she had observed and recorded the whole event, and that various things had gone differently from what Barnard and his white and racist team members had said. Ascot also said she had also made a personality analysis of Barnard, that Christian Barnard was completely taken in by himself, lived in arrogance and egomania, and thus always wanted to be the center of all actions and events, as a result of which he always interpreted all processes of things, events, situations, and experiences, etc. in an ego-related way. In addition, he was also addicted to the media and to celebrities, in order to stand there as an absolute hero and be idolized through as many interviews as possible and through a pathological greed for acquaintances with prominent persons who played a major role in the world public. Some time ago, I read something about the first heart implantation, and there was also talk of the South African who played a major role in the implantation. Consequently, I thought 4 days ago that I could check Wikipedia to see what was written about this first heart implantation, and I did indeed find some information, such as that on the 3rd of December 1967, a South African transplant team led by the surgeon Christian Neethling Barnard performed the world's first heart transplant at the Groote Schuur Hospital in Cape Town. This proclaimed Barnard a pioneer in the field of heart transplantation, although the patient Wikipedia, Louis Washkansky, then survived the operation for only 18 days, as did others with hearts implanted by Barnard. Wikipedia writes, among other things, in 2004, Barnard was voted second only to Nelson Mandela in the list of the 100 greatest South Africans of all time. 100 greatest South Africans of all time. Barnard became a legend through this first heart implantation in the 1960s, not only in South Africa but also worldwide, although it was concealed that in addition to Barnard, another key player was involved in the whole thing, namely a colored South African named Hamilton Naki. As a result of apartheid at the time, however, this was vehemently denied, which is also still the case today. This is especially due to apartheid and the racial hatred that is still rampant among the white doctors who were involved in the implantation at the time, as a result of which they stubbornly denied Naki's valuable cooperation and still do so today. So I searched further and found the following.
Wikipedia, Hamilton Naki, born in the village of Msingane in the Transkei, had to leave school at the age of 14 because his parents could no longer afford to send their son to school. In order to find work, Naki went to Cape Town a little later, where he first found work as a gardener at the University of Cape Town Medical School. His duties included maintaining the tennis courts. Subsequently, Naki was allowed to take on further tasks. For example, he was first employed by the head of the Animal Experimental Laboratory Robert Goetz, who had fled from National Socialist Germany to South Africa, to provide anesthesia for animal operations for training purposes. Once he was also allowed to assist in an operation on a giraffe. His great skill and his great willingness and ability to learn were conspicuous. Through his experience as an assistant in animal experiments, he was also soon allowed to teach students in this field. According to reports in The Economist, Despite these special tasks, Naki only received the pay of a gardener, the equivalent of about $270 per month. But there is also disagreement about this salary. According to reports in the New York Times, Naki was in fact paid adequately for his work, and he did not die penniless either. According to Naki's own account, he was also involved in the first successful heart transplant, with which the team made history on December 3, 1967, taking over a technically very demanding part of the operation with the removal and preparation of the heart. This version was also spread in the obituaries after his death. A few weeks later, Kelezer, The Economist, published a correction based on statements by doctors at the Groot Schuur Hospital and a source close to Naki, according to which he was not present at the operation because, as a colored man and medical layman, he had no access to the operating theater at all. This is also confirmed by other sources. Due to apartheid in South Africa, Naki's achievements remained secret for a long time. Even though he can be seen in the background in press photos after the successful transplantation, he was always introduced as a cleaning assistant when asked. Barnard himself only admitted many years later, shortly before his death, that Naki may not only have had better surgical talent than himself, but also that Naki had made a significant contribution to research in transplant medicine. In 2003, Naki was therefore awarded an honorary doctorate from the University of Cape Town. Reception in 2008, Hidden Heart English subtitle, The Story of Christiaan Barnard and Hamilton Naki, a documentary film tracing Naki's story, was released. In the course of their research, director Werner Schweitzer and Zurich journalist Christina Carr interviewed contemporary witnesses and used archive footage. Christiaan Neethling Barnard November 8, 1922 in Beaufort West, South Africa, September 2, 2001 in Paphos, Cyprus, was a South African heart surgeon and pioneer in the field of heart transplants. On 3 December 1967, a South African transplant team led by Christiaan Barnard performed the world's first heart transplant at Groot Schuur Hospital in Cape Town. The patient Louis Washkansky survived the operation for 18 days. In 2004, Barnard was voted second only to Nelson Mandela in the list of the 100 greatest South Africans of all time. He's been regarded as a legend not only in South Africa since the 1960s. Family Barnard grew up in poor circumstances as one of 4 sons of a Burmese preacher family in the South African Cape Province. In 1948, he married Aletta Gertruida Lew. The couple had a daughter and a son. After divorcing in 1970, he married Barbara Maria Zollner, an 18-year-old. The couple had 2 sons. In 1982, the marriage was divorced. In 1988, Karen Setskorn became his 3rd wife, with whom he had a daughter and a son. In 2000, this marriage was also divorced. While on holiday in Cyprus in 2001, Barnard succumbed to respiratory arrest as a result of an asthmatic attack. After the cremation of the body, the urn was transferred to South Africa and buried in the garden of the Dutch Reformed Church in Beaufort West. Education and profession, like his brother Marius, who later worked on his transplant team, Barnard attended his hometown high school and studied medicine at the University of Cape Town and the University of Minnesota. He received his specialist surgical training in the USA, performed open heart surgery with heart surgeon Clarence Walton Lillehay in Minneapolis, and familiarized himself with the latest techniques in heart transplantation, which was still experimental. As a gift from his American colleagues, he brought a heart-lung machine to South Africa in 1958. There he worked as a general practitioner in Cape Town and at Groote Schuur Hospital. He quickly became a surgical assistant, then director of the medical school at the University of Cape Town, and at the age of only 40 was appointed professor of thoracic surgery. He performed around 1,000 heart operations using various techniques. Using a modified method developed by his American colleagues, Barnard, who had received little attention until then, performed the world's first successful heart transplant on the 3rd of December, 1967. In 1983, he had to give up operating because he became ill with arthritis, and his hands in particular were affected. In 1985, he took up a scientific position at the Heart Center in Oklahoma, USA. Achievement on the 3rd of December, 1967, Christiaan Barnard led the 31-member transplant team that performed the first successful heart transplant on human beings. The patient, Louis Washkansky, was transplanted with the heart of Denise Darvall, who had been killed in a car accident at the age of 25, in a 5-hour operation at the Groote Schuur Hospital in Cape Town. The operation was successful in that Washkansky survived it. To prevent his body from rejecting the foreign organ, Washkansky's immune system was largely disabled. Thus, he died after 18 days as a result of an infection from pneumonia. The second patient, Philip Bleiberg, was operated on January 2, 1968, and lived with the transplanted heart for 18 months. An important member of Barnard's team was also the colored South African Hamilton Naki, who made considerable contributions to the development of the surgical technique, which, however, had to be kept quiet due to apartheid at the time. In 1974, Barnard succeeded in proving that 2 hearts can beat in the chest of human beings. He performed the first piggyback heart transplant heterotopic transplant, a measure to help the new heart work with the work of the old heart. Barnard as a media star. His very first television appearance in Germany made headlines, as Barnard was seen on the cover of a magazine with a well-known nude model in his arms. Barnard was now a media star, and he enjoyed this life. Lectures, interviews and talk shows, audience with the Pope, film party with Sophia Loren, love affair with Gina Lollobrigida, reception by American President Lyndon B. Johnson, Rolls-Royce, parties on yachts, Studio 54, New York City, Monaco and Grace Kelly, Crazy Horse in Paris, reception by the Shah of Persia, Imelda Marcos, friendship with Peter Sellers, autobiography, flash mob, gossip columns, and on the front pages. In his autobiography, The Second Life, Barnard takes a self-critical approach to this lifestyle and admits that his family life suffered as a result. But he did not neglect his profession and his patients. The Groote Schuur enjoyed a worldwide reputation and attracted international patients. The role of Barnard and his patients Washkansky and Bleiberg for journalism of that time was described in detail by the media researcher and later medical journalist Eckhart Roloff in 1972 in a Salzburg dissertation on journalism. It appeared in print for the first time a good 40 years later and is provided with a current preface and epilogue. Barnard spent his twilight years in Austria, where he established the Christiaan Barnard Foundation to support disadvantaged children around the world, and on his farm in Beaufort West. 2 days before his death, he had been granted Austrian citizenship, according to the APA.
So it was as a result of apartheid and racial hatred at the time, and it still is with racists today, that Hamilton Naki was a major key player in the first heart implantation, with Ascot stating at the time that without this man's active involvement the whole thing would not have succeeded. So, now I want to know if you are aware of what happened at that time, and if so, what you can tell me about it.
Yes, I know about it, because at that time we dealt with the events and also examined the picture recordings of the whole process made by Ascot. As a result of which I can confirm everything and say that the South African Hamilton Naki was indeed the actual important person with regard to the success of the implantation. Although he only acted as a surgical assistant in the clinic, he acquired better knowledge and surgical skills than those of Christian Barnard. And I do not know if any of the members of the surgical team of that time are still alive today, because all of them must have died since then or be very old. And if some of them should still be alive today, then it is not to be assumed that they have freed themselves from their delusion of racism, but continue to cultivate it and consequently do not stand by the effective truth, but deny it, precisely that the South African Hamilton Naki was an important key player in the first heart implantation, for which Barnard did everything to be the man and hero in this respect.
That's how I saw it when Ascot told me the whole thing. While I never doubted Ascot's claims, for she had as much integrity for me as your father Svath. Your daughter Simya Se Quetzal, you and all the rest of you, you have now confirmed everything, which to me means we need not talk about it any further. So I can bring up something else, and that is that I am making a strange observation that is going on in nature. For the last 3 years or so I have been feeling more and coming to the view that in nature the whole characteristic is somehow changing negatively in every respect. Everything that blossoms and smells, as well as the leaves and needles of the trees, all the grasses of the meadows, etc., all the shrubs and bushes, the various types of grain, as well as the native and southern fruits, etc., seem to smell different to me, just as they taste different to me, including all the vegetables. I became aware of this, as I said, 3 years ago and have since made the strange observations. As an old coffee drinker who always needed the same brand of coffee for decades, today, unfortunately, I am not supposed to drink coffee anymore according to a doctor's prescription, which I also comply with. I also noticed that the coffee somehow changed in taste and became weaker. Admittedly, all these observations were and are also today only very minimal and probably not perceptible to human beings if they do not have a distinct sense of smell and scent. I have also noticed that even people I know who have a strong sense of smell and scent do not follow my perceptions, and they themselves could not perceive anything in relation to any change in nature. Certainly not in relation to the sense of nature and the various tastes. I have already asked myself whether I am perhaps crazy or going mad, but the devil take it. It is really the case that I have been making these observations for 3 years and am not mistaken, which is why I think that the whole thing can only be perceived if one consciously occupies oneself with it in a neutral way on the one hand and intensively on the other. I have also come to the conclusion that the whole thing could be a phenomenon of climate change, which is far from having reached its full volume and will therefore become much more catastrophic and bring a great deal of natural change and destruction as well as a great deal of suffering, hardship and misery for the whole of humanity. The experts who deal with the climate phenomenon still look at the whole of this through rose-colored glasses and do not recognize the effective facts, such as the fact that the further progress of climate change will bring even more serious, more profound, and very severe consequences of change. What do you think about all that I have said?
In order to answer your question and explanation, I do not have to think about it first, because the whole thing actually results from climate change, which we have clearly also explored ourselves a long time ago, before you now talk about your perceptions. The fact is that due to the worldwide change in climate, everything in nature is changing, and also in the relationships of the scent of plants and the taste of fruits and other food crops that you mentioned. This is particularly noticeable in the southern hemisphere. Whereas in the northern hemisphere there is still hardly anything noticeable, which is why the persons you are talking to may smile at you and
Think I am out of my depth and do not take you seriously.
no matter what you call it, but I was going to say something similar. It is also to be explained that due to the influence of climate change, the whole of nature and its flora are changing negatively all over the world, but all the fauna is also following suit and has to adapt to these changes. In fact, everything is degenerating more and more negatively and affecting the entire plant world more and more, whereby the southern hemisphere is particularly affected in this respect today because it reacts more sensitively to the influences of change than the more robust northern hemisphere. Climate change affects the whole of nature and its flora and fauna, as well as the entire planet, so that in the southern and northern hemispheres, among other things, the fruits and vegetables of all genera and species also change. This change also has an increasingly negative effect on their fragrance and taste, as well as on their nutrients and quality. Also, as a result of all this, many plants, trees, bushes and shrubs, as well as all kinds of grains, grasses and vegetables, etc., will be reduced in their production, and consequently the harvests will be less productive, and also many plants important for human food and many other living beings will die off and even become extinct. This, however, will have an increasing effect on the world food trade, which is already in the preliminary stages, as a result of which the prices, especially for natural foodstuffs, will be driven up rapidly and increasingly, which will lead to many Earth humans succumbing to hunger and dying because they will no longer be able to afford the necessary food as a result of their lack of the necessary financial means. And as far as you say about the progressing and immense climate change, I can only confirm your explanation as correct.
Thanks, but I would like to say the following about it. About the importance of nature, it is to be said that it is absolutely vital for the whole of humanity. Only a largely intact nature offers human beings and all life forms of fauna and flora a real possibility of existence. What earthly humanity is doing to nature and everything connected with it, so also in relation to the planet itself, is not only criminal but effectively felonious and is leading to the destruction of the world. The culprit is the enormous mass of humanity of 8,739,001,024 equals sign or 8.739 billion Earth humans so far, which has destroyed nature, its fauna and flora, the climate and also the planet with its criminal machinations, and has thus also caused climate change, from which worldwide natural catastrophes and destruction of many kinds have resulted. Forest dieback and air pollution. Toxic chemicals in streams, soils, rivers, fields, gardens, and lakes, as well as countless tonnages of plastic and other synthetic materials and other rubbish are polluting the oceans more and more. Oil-contaminated beaches of lakes and seas are also part of the daily order of doom, as well as unintentional leaks of toxic substances in laboratories, such as the chemical accident or Seveso disaster that occurred on Saturday, the 10th of July 1976, in the chemical factory Ichmesa in Meda, Italy, 20 kilometers north of Milan. Ichmesa was a chemical factory and subsidiary of the Givaudan Group, which in turn was a subsidiary of the Roche Group. The company site touched the territory of 4 municipalities, among them also Seveso, which became the eponym of the accident. At the time, an unknown quantity of the highly toxic dioxin TCDD, colloquially known simply as dioxin, or since then also as Seveso poison, escaped from the plant. Also nuclear power plant disasters, such as the first major one on the 26th of April 1986, when the reactor in Unit 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded near the Ukrainian city of Pripyat, causing nuclear contamination far and wide. And equally in this regard is also the nuclear disaster at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in Okuma, Japan, which to this day has the highest level 7 on the GAU list. The greenhouse effect and the hole in the ozone layer should also be mentioned, as well as all the many environmental crises and disasters that have increased in severity and devastation since the end of the Third and last World Wars. But also, the exploitation of the Earth's resources has brought and continues to bring disaster and destruction. But all those corporate, bank and profiteering sharks do not care about that, because they only think greedily about their financial profiteering and profits and do not give it a second thought, that the whole of humanity, nature and its fauna and flora cannot live and exist on the forms of resources, but only on healthy food plants, which need soils, fields, and gardens as well as water, forests, and air in a poison-free way, as well as a bearable and normal climate. Obviously, however, the intelligence of the majority of those responsible for Earth humans, and these are, on the one hand, the scientists responsible for this and the planet, and nature-robbing financial sharks, as well as all those who, as a rule, only have their rabbit-like reproduction of offspring sitting in their dull skulls, is not developed to such an extent that they would have a clear mind, brilliant reason, and a conscious sense of responsibility regarding the function and value of nature, its fauna and flora, as well as the planet and its climate. Even today, in the 21st century, the majority of all experts in humanity itself think far too indifferently and irresponsibly, if this majority thinks about it at all. Thus, it is only thought about extremely carelessly or not at all that every human being and every living being needs nature and its fauna and flora as well as the planet as an existential space of experience and as an instance of meaning. Thus, not simply for survival, but quite specifically in order to be able to lead a righteous, meaningful, and good life that is adapted to everything creative. And this creative is not simply related to an insane and crazy belief in an imaginary and never-existent God of some religion or sect, but effectively to the creation itself, respectively to the entire creative, which manifests itself in everything that exists in the universe and embodies itself in all celestial bodies and worlds, etc., as well as in the planet Earth, in its nature, fauna, and flora, and also in the climate.
How could it also be otherwise than that you also bring everything to that point with your execution this time, which corresponds to the facts and must be made clear?
Thanks, but something else. It is now probably 4 or 5 years ago when you said that the EU dictatorship crazies would deal with thoughts and plans of reshaping their EU dictatorship according to the system of the United States of America, and thus abolish themselves as a union dictatorship. Do you have any new insights in this regard?
Yes, the whole thing has been further elaborated and is now slowly coming out into the open.
Aha, so this plan has been further tinkered with to create United States of Europe, so to speak.
That is the whole point of it.
It is possible that the US also has a hand in this. But while I am talking about the USA, I would like to talk about how they hype their victories in wars, etc. all over the world, whereas in fact, many things are nothing but lies and deception. Since time immemorial, as Svath, then also Simyase, Quetzal, and you have explained to me, the US Americans have exalted their glorious victories, which in reality were often defeats, as US military heroic deeds by means of subsequently faked propagandistically constructed film footage, whereby they then spread the fraudulent original film footage in news and newsreels, etc., which the US Americans then used for their own purposes, purporting to prove US military heroics and victories that were never actually achieved. Fraudulently, together with their military, they have, totally distorting the facts, reenacted and filmed many victorious US war events to make US America appear heroic and victorious, by presenting the fraudulent film footage to the American people and the world public, and still do today. And all the military and other participants in these fraudulent and truth-twisting films, etc., were sworn to silence so that nothing of the whole thing would get out to the public and thus also not damage the US victorious image. I would like to know if you know whether these fraudulent activities are still being carried out today, or whether these nasty US propaganda tours have been abandoned.
Such staged, fake recordings with fraudulent reporting are still being made and disseminated around the world today, not only by the US, but also by other states. Nowadays, Such fraudulent recordings and the necessary sound effects and commentaries are no longer produced in the form of running films with film cameras, but in the technically advanced manner of computer animation, which gives the illusion that everything appears genuine and real. Even back then, when you were still photographing our flying apparatuses with your unmanipulable Olympus photo equipment in the 1970s and the first 3 years of the 1980s, computer technology, which was in the process of significant development, was already being developed and advanced in rapid succession. As a result, from the mid-1980s onwards, it was possible to produce and falsify computer-generated images that were deceptively similar to your real. Photographs of our flying apparatus and could only be recognized as computer products by means of high technical analyses. That was the reason because we knew the coming computer development, which we impulsively promoted, that, according to our instructions, you had to photograph our flying apparatus with a manipulation-incapable photo camera even before this time of computer emergence. This was precisely because we also knew that afterwards, when it became possible to produce pictures with computers, fraudsters and charlatans, etc., would appear all over the world and produce computer-falsified pictures of supposedly extraterrestrial flying apparatus in order to use them for charlatanry or fraud and lying. However, this computer technology continued to develop unstoppably, resulting in more and more possibilities of use, such as computer animations up to the present day. However, this technology is also far advanced and will open up many more possibilities, which will not only be positive, but unfortunately also extremely negative, malicious, and very destructive and devastating. Furthermore, with regard to the falsification of events, actions, and the like, it is to be said that irresponsible journalists also commit such frauds, for example, by making and continuing to make various kinds of picture recordings arranged by them for sensational purposes. To this end, they have animated and continued to animate, for example, military personnel and other combatants in combat zones with sums of money, in order to fraudulently simulate combat events which are in reality only faked, but which are then recorded photographically or by means of running pictures, photos, videos, and small computer imaging devices. These are then profitably sold by the fallible journalists to various public media, such as newspapers, journals, and television, which in turn fraudulently present the image and film material to the readership and viewership as original documentation of events.
This has always been the case. Ever since the reporting of the fallible journalists only focused on sensationalism, which, however, not only gave the fallible journalists but also the righteous ones a bad name. And bad and unjust journalism is so widespread today that it is only a rarity for journalists to write the effective truth. I can sing a sad song about this myself from experience, because on the one hand there are journalists who publish large and far-reaching articles in newspapers and magazines in connection with alleged interviews with me and thus fraudulently deceive the readership, although they have never done an interview with me, but have invented everything freely. On the other hand, there are also those journalists who, at their own discretion, completely change, twist and falsify what they have been told in actual interviews and, in addition, have to add their own intelligent and stupid commentary crap and think that they can shine with it and make themselves big and important. So I gave up giving interviews for journalists several decades ago, because only extremely rarely was a fair, correct, and truthful as well as unadulterated reporting and similar interview reproduction published. Good, honest, and worthy exceptions have been extremely few in the last 40 years, such as the former journalist Wasserman, who worked for the journal Quick, and the Dutch singer-songwriter, violinist, writer, clown and actor Hermanus Jantinus, respectively Herman van Veen, who published a long article in Piero magazine after his visit to the SSSC. Also to be mentioned in this vein is the German Michael Hesemann, historian, author, documentary filmmaker, and specialist journalist for contemporary and church history topics, as well as former editor of Magazine 2000, who studied history, cultural anthropology, German studies and journalism at the University of Göttingen from 1983 to 1989. For years, he was also extremely intensively and neutrally concerned with my history and everything connected with it, and often stayed at the SSSC, once also together with Ingrid Schlotterbeck, the editor of Magazine 2000. He has also written a number of things on the internet about the visits and conversations between Michael and me about the investigations into my so-called UFO case, etc. Such as the following, which I have copied out, and in which a person P is mentioned, whose real name probably does not need to be mentioned because it is well understood who it is. And these excerpts include remarks by Chanot P, who must also have been mentioned once in our conversations. If you want, I can read you these excerpt copies from the internet, but I would like to insert them here in our conversation. What do you think about it? Are you interested in it at all, or do you know it all already?
Of course I am interested because I have not looked for any material of this kind on the internet, and consequently I haven't read it either. But I see that your copies correspond to several pages, which would take too long to read out, so you can give me the internet data, after which I can search and read everything myself.
Sure, I will do that later. Then I will insert the copy pages here.
Internet excerpts from Michael Heisman on the topics: UFO controversy, proponents, truth. Dear Jim, here is my answer to the statements of KKK equals Cal K Korf, D. A case of the caliber of the Billy Meier case can only be investigated by an interdisciplinary approach in which each expert has his own role. It does not help the case if, for example, 10 researchers travel to Switzerland several times to interview the same witnesses 10 times, repeating themselves ad nauseam. It helps the case if each team member becomes active in his or her field of expertise, and if the team members exchange the results of their disciplines. That's why it was more than enough when Lieutenant Colonel W.C. Stevens, Britton Lee Elders and Tom Welsh went to Switzerland in 1978-80 to conduct a field investigation which was repeated in 1998 by Jamie Mausen, a professional TV journalist for Televisa, the largest private TV station in Mexico, and I, a cultural anthropologist and historian, and which confirmed the results of the first investigation. Michael Heisman, in the course of our investigation, which included 4 visits to Switzerland on my part and 2 on Jamie's part, we were able to interview 24 eyewitnesses, 21 of them FIGU members, 2 normal inhabitants of the village of Schmidruti, and a UN diplomat. Film Billy's picture and film collection as well as metal samples and measure 4 of his contact or picture-taking locations. While evaluating his 8mm films, we managed to locate a first-generation print from 1976 as well as first-generation prints of his pictures, far better material than the critics ever dealt with. In the years before, I visited Billy's residence half a dozen times and had 2 very intense conversations, one in 1988, the other in 1990. At that time, P testified in testimony to Billy's contacts and confirmed in an affidavit 1991 that no evidence was ever found in Billy's contacts to suggest that Billy manipulated or falsified any evidence. So allow me to ask, was P lying then, or is P lying now? Or are we merely confronted with a war of the roses? Is Kvyat's journalism as serious as that of someone trying to get the truth about Woody Allen by merely interviewing Mia Farrow? It is a documented and witnessed fact that Kvyat contacted Billy in March 1998 and promised him a fair presentation of his case. In fact, he told Billy that he believed in his case and had been trying for years to present it to the American public in an open, positive way. He told me the same thing. That's why Billy gave him permission to use his film.
Bob Kvyat lied to us and grossly abused our trust. His Fox swindle, far from being a fair journalistic treatment of the case, is nothing but a public condemnation without the slightest possibility of defense. On the other hand, it merely proved how unscrupulous and manipulative Hollywood producers can be when they smell a quick buck. P.S. Bin lid rubbish is outright nonsense. Yes, there is a remote resemblance between those bin lids and part of the pie ship. But what does this tell us about a case that was closed in its photo phase back in 1976, after half a dozen UFO types were recorded in authentic settings, objects of which we have comparison snapshots of identical flying apparatus from different countries? I admit that the pie ships were taken at a rather difficult time, after Semyase's contacts had ended and just before Billy, after the stress of various attacks, suffered a breakdown from which he is still recovering. Therefore, there is a possibility that these pictures, like others, served the purpose of contaminating the case. On the other hand, we have carefully examined the pictures and the film of the flying apparatus. The bin lids are plastic. The ship is made of highly reflective metal. The ship was filmed hovering in front of a tall tree. We compared this with various miniature trees and the large Swiss weather firs and found that its structure corresponded to a large weather fir, with the colors of the tree reflecting off its mirror-like surface. In the original film, when Billy zooms in and out of the scene, you can clearly see the meadow he is standing in and the distance of well over 100 meters between him and the tree with the flying apparatus. Anyone who has ever met Billy Meier in person can confirm that his personality is not that of a cult leader, nor is his position in Figu that of an authoritarian leader. KKK never met Billy, which is why he cannot say anything about him either. The structure of the Figu is purely democratic. Every single agenda item is voted on. A cult has a totalitarian ideology. Believe and you will find salvation. Billy teaches, do not believe, find out the truth for yourself. In his philosophy, human beings can only evolve through self-knowledge. He does not appear in public. He does not want to become a public person because he does not want people to follow him or to see him as something special. Instead, he wants human beings to learn and find the truth for themselves because this is the only way they can grow and evolve. Michael Heisman, Editor-in-Chief Magazine 2000+, Germany Magazine 2000+, investigates the background of the UFO controversy of the year-new-old rumors about Billy Edward Albert Meier and Michael Heisman. On the topics, Truth, Heisman Michael Copyright Symbol Figu 1996-2017, Semyase Silverstar Center, CH 8495 Shmadruti Author, Shino P.
Once again, rumors and slander are circulating in the world and especially on the internet that Michael Hesemann, author, historian, specialist journalist, and documentary filmmaker, is allegedly distancing himself from the Billy Meier case and considers the whole thing a lie and a fraud. Already a year ago, such accusations appeared on relevant sites, and in the meantime, these rumors seem to repeat themselves in an annual rhythm. A direct inquiry to Michael Hesemann on the part of the Figu has shown that these accusations do not correspond to the truth and reality, and represent nothing but lies, slander, and untruths. Michael Hesemann has been firmly convinced that the Billy Meier case is genuine and authentic for decades, and describes Billy Edward Albert Meier and his comrades in arms as honest personalities with integrity, which has not changed up to the present time. See the following email excerpt from Michael Hesemann to Christian Freiner in the Figu. If one gets to the bottom of these rumors and accusations, then the serious researcher will inevitably come across internet pages that adorn themselves with reports and debauchery by Werner Walter. a trained retail salesman, would-be ufologist and co-founder of Synapse Centrales Erforschungsnetz Außergewöhnlicher Phänomene. In ufological circles, Werner Walter is known as a hardliner and outspoken skeptic who consistently describes all sightings, accounts and reports in connection with UFO phenomena, reports of unidentified flying objects, either as natural phenomena, terrestrial flying objects or delusions, or, if this is no longer sufficient as an explanation, as lies and fraud, or as profit-seeking activities. Of course, many reports and explanations of the UFO phenomenon can be classified as either natural phenomena, terrestrial flying objects, delusions, or deliberate deception. Nevertheless, some sightings, descriptions and reports in this field can be traced back to extraterrestrial flying objects, even if Werner Walter does not want to admit this, and publicly claims that the real existing contacts of Billy Edward Albert Meyer with extraterrestrial human beings are nothing more than the fraudulent work of one man, who has merely fabricated all his reports, explanations and explanations in this regard, and has apparently been able to lead a whole armada of human beings on a fool's rope and into error over many decades. It is precisely the accusations and untenable rumors against Michael Hesemann that apparently led back to a report that was already published in the 90s of the 20th century by Werner Walter, and which deals with the dubious investigation of the Billy Meyer case by the U.S.-American Cal Korff, among others, which can be read under the title Billy Meyer News, the biggest UFO photo hoax of all times, on the website fischinger.alien.d. Every interested and honest reader is advised to take the opportunity to read this report by Werner Walter, in order to form his own opinion about the alleged seriousness, honesty, and quality of this pseudo-ufologist and would-be great. In this, as in the countless reports Werner Walter has published so far, it is clearly recognizable that this man confuses his writing frenzy with great writing and quantity with quality. The aforementioned report in particular is characteristic of a flood of accusations, attacks, conjectures and speculations, as well as half-truths and even untruths, which are not only presented to the reader in a correspondingly unserious, superficial, primitive, and childish manner, but also make it obvious that Werner Walter is completely incompetent, does very little or no research of his own, and has not done any research at all. He has not even managed to set foot on the center grounds of the Free Interest Group in order to contact Billy or any other member of the FIGU, and to talk to him or members of the association. If one takes a closer look at Werner Walter's writings, which are written in an extremely poor and primitive style, then the honest and also only halfway sensible reader will be able to recognize that this busybody is not at all concerned with the truth and reality in ufological matters, but only with his own profit and his own image in public. On the other hand, unfortunately, it also becomes clear that Werner Walter is tormented by feelings of inferiority, and he obviously feels compelled to begrudge success and discredit all those who have made it further in life than he has, such as Billy Edward Albert Meyer, Michael Hesemann, and many other personalities. In this respect, it is desirable that Werner Walter will one day recognize these things himself and thus learn to work on himself first and spend his time and energy on his own personal development instead of discrediting and discrediting decent and blameless citizens. Of course, we have nothing against criticism if it is justifiably directed against us, as long as it is based on objectivity, neutrality, and impartiality, and contains real reasons and arguments in the sense of honest facts and serves to establish the truth. But what intelligentsia like Werner Walter, Cal Korff, and others from the same circle allow themselves has nothing to do with objective and constructive criticism, but represents a roundabout attack in the most primitive, vile and denunciatory manner, a web of lies without equal, which only serves the purpose of cultivating one's own ego and image, and the fulfillment of one's own profit-related interests and goals in order to conceal one's own stupidity and inadequacy, which, however, especially in the case of the would-be great Werner Walter, but also in the case of Cal Korff, is no more than a slap in the dirty water, in that they breed their hate speech and slander, and in their stupidity do not realize that they are cutting their own flesh. And whose brainchild Werner Walter really is, and that he only cares about being able to distinguish himself in front of the world, is clear from his website, where he boasts in the highest terms of all kinds of skills and knowledge, etc., which fizzle out like smoke and mirrors when you get to the bottom of them.
Subject: Re-accusations dissolve date: Thursday, October 4th, 2007, 21:27 and 22 seconds. Mheisman at AOL. Com wrote, "Dear Christian, then everything was as I said." The topic also came up on Par News Net about a year ago. The fact is, when I first heard about Billy through Ilse von Jacobi, I was fascinated. I got in touch with Bernadette Brand, ordered several hundred photos and books. Then, in the early 1980s, Coleman von Kavitsky told me that Billy's material was fake. I was skeptical, but eventually I received the Cal Korff report of the time, the most infamous hoax in ufology, and capitulated. Korff, supported by GSW and MIRFON, claimed to have proved by computer that Billy's photos showed small models on strings. I had to accept this as fact for the time being, especially since the entire ufological community unanimously rejected the case. In 1988, I got in touch with Wendell again, who had in the meantime served a prison sentence, and who sent me his counter-report. Only now did I learn that the case was not as solved as it had been presented. I invited Wendell to the 1989 UFO conference. He in turn invited me to Tucson in 1990, where I came into contact with Jim Dilatoso and the other investigators of the case, who showed me where Korff and Co. had aired or even maliciously manipulated the suspension threads had actually been conjured into the picture, since the picture had been cropped arbitrarily. The model should have been hanging slightly diagonally from the thread, which is of course impossible. But the decisive factor was that I met Guido Moosbrugger at the end of 1988, who immediately convinced me as a human being. I also say today, a guy like Guido doesn't lie. The man is 100% integer, fundamentally honest and fundamentally decent. If a man like Guido M. had experienced what he described to me, there had to be something to the Meyer case. So I went there again at the end of 1988, then, as I said, received the counter-assessments from Jim D. and Co. in 1990 and finally decided to publish Guido's book so that he could present the case from his point of view. I also processed the newly received material from which Gary Kinder also made a book, Light Years, in Secret UFO Case. Due to the many attacks and criticisms, I also decided in the mid-1990s to reopen the Meyer case, that is to say to conduct a thorough new, unprejudiced investigation. Together with Jamie Mawson, I interviewed about 40 eyewitnesses. Of course, Billy himself followed up the witness reports from India, obtained expert opinions, and documented everything on video. My report was published in Magazine 2000, which you have in front of you. I have not changed my opinion since then. I have also not become aware of any facts that would lead to a revision of my opinion. Billy has real contacts. There are dozens of eyewitnesses to this. He has made some of the best UFO photos and films in the world, even though his material has been manipulated and contaminated from the outside, as I already wrote in Secret UFO Affair. Billy himself might also make no secret of this. What I wrote and believed at some point in the early 1980s, as a teenager, is no longer relevant to me today. At that time, I was not even qualified to investigate a case, because I was just a schoolboy. My mistake at the time, and that of many in UFO research, was to believe the Korff report at the time. Today we all know that Korf is a fibber. If you want to convince yourself of that, you can have a good laugh at cockworf.com http://www. Cockworf.com. He now calls himself a colonel of a private Israeli special secret service, and now claims to be Jewish, after claiming in an interview just a few years ago that he was an evangelical Christian, had found the true root of the Exodus and now wanted to investigate the Shroud of Turin. On his website he uses photos of Czech models who interview him, and it is striking that all these models imitate his style of speaking. Of course, nobody in the fashion world knows the Czech supermodel, the second most beautiful woman in Europe, one Martina Tykova, who is supposedly his assistant. The fact that the investigation I conducted in the 1990s came to a different positive conclusion than I would have believed in the 1980s only shows that I was really prepared to approach the matter with an open mind and, if the facts demand it, also to revise my opinion. When Werner Walter claims that commercial interests guided me, that is simply ridiculous. I never marketed the case, never even finished the video, although the cost of my investigation due to the high travel expenses was much higher than anything ever earned from the sale of Guido's book, and the pre-financing by Figu was solely to cover the travel expenses for Phobal & Co. to India, Of course, I am still attacked by Walter & Co. because of this, but I don't care about that either. For me, the only thing that counts is the truth. Sincere greetings to you and all other Figu ANS, your Michael Heisman.
There is nothing wrong with that, but time has moved on again, and I see you are tired, so I think we will end our conversation for today and I will go my way.
I think that's good. I mean, the go your way, because all you have to do is go through the gate, and you're already at the desired location in your giant spacecraft.
Which is correct, of course. But then goodbye, Edward, and go to sleep, for your tiredness hardly lets you keep your eyes open.
Goodbye, too, and you are right that I am really very tired.